The morning of June 15th began like a dream for Helena Moore. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Church in downtown Chicago, painting the white roses in shades of gold and crimson. The pews were filled with over 200 guests, their hushed conversations creating a gentle hum of anticipation. Helena's hands trembled as she stood in the small preparation room behind the altar, adjusting her veil for the 100th time. She wore a simple ivory dress, nothing extravagant, because there had never been much money for extravagance. Helena had worked double shifts at the diner on 5th Street for 2 years to afford even this modest ceremony. Her mother had passed away when she was 16, and her father had disappeared long before that. She had no family left, no safety net, just dreams. And today, those dreams were supposed to come true. Her fiancé, Marcus Holloway, had promised her a future. He was charming, ambitious, always talking about the business deals that would change their lives. He worked in real estate, he said. Important clients. Big opportunities. Helena believed every word because she wanted to believe. Because she needed to believe that someone could love her enough to stay. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. By 2:15, Marcus still hadn't arrived. Helena's maid of honor, Claire, tried to reassure her. Traffic, maybe. A delay with the groomsmen. Nothing to worry about. But Helena could see the concern in Claire's eyes, the way she kept glancing at her phone, typing frantic messages that went unanswered. By 2:30, the whispers began. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed. A child started crying and was quickly hushed. The priest, Father Sullivan, approached Helena with gentle words and a worried expression. Perhaps they should wait a bit longer. Perhaps there was an explanation. By 3 o'clock, Helena knew the truth she'd been denying. He wasn't coming. Marcus Holloway, the man who had promised to love her forever, who had held her hand through every hardship and whispered that she'd never be alone again, had abandoned her on their wedding day, in front of everyone. The humiliation crashed over her like a physical blow. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred with tears. She could feel the eyes of every guest boring into her back, their pity worse than their judgment. She imagined what they were thinking. Poor Helena. Always knew she wasn't good enough. What did she expect? Claire tried to hold her, but Helena pulled away. She walked slowly down the side aisle toward the altar, her legs barely holding her weight. The white roses suddenly looked like funeral flowers. The beautiful church felt like a tomb. When she reached the steps before the altar, her knees buckled. Helena collapsed, her dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She pressed her hands against the cold marble floor and let the sobs come. Raw, broken sounds that echoed through the silent church. No one moved. No one knew what to say. The dream she'd clung to for so long shattered into a million pieces, and she couldn't imagine how she'd ever pick them up again. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. And then, the doors exploded open. The sound was like a gunshot reverberating through the sacred space. Every head turned. Helena looked up through her tears, mascara streaming down her face. 6 men in immaculate black suits entered the church. They moved with military precision, their faces expressionless, their presence commanding immediate silence. They weren't guests. They weren't part of any wedding party. They were something else entirely, something dangerous. The guests instinctively drew back, parents pulling their children closer. A few people reached for their phones, but the icy stares from the men in black made them think twice. And then he appeared. Dante Moretti walked through those church doors like he owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with dark hair slicked back and a jaw that looked carved from granite. His suit was custom-tailored, probably worth more than Helena's entire wedding budget. But it wasn't his appearance that made everyone freeze. It was his eyes. Cold, calculating, absolutely ruthless. These were eyes that had seen things, done things, that ordinary people couldn't imagine. Helena had heard the name Dante Moretti before. Everyone in Chicago had. He was the ghost story mothers used to scare their children. The man behind a dozen unsolved crimes. The king of an empire built on fear and absolute loyalty. The police couldn't touch him. Politicians wouldn't dare try. He existed in the shadows, and when he stepped into the light, people disappeared. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his expensive shoes clicking against the stone floor. His men flanked him on both sides, their hands resting near their jackets where Helena was certain weapons were concealed. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with each step he took. Father Sullivan's face went pale. Several guests looked like they might faint. Dante Moretti stopped directly in front of Helena, who was still kneeling, her dress ruined, her face a mess of tears and broken hopes. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. His expression was unreadable, neither kind nor cruel, just assessing, calculating. Then he spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily through the stunned silence. "This wedding will not be cancelled. I will marry her." The words hung in the air like a verdict. No one breathed. No one moved. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Absolute and final. Helena stared up at him, unable to process what she was hearing. This made no sense. Dante Moretti didn't know her. They'd never met. She was nobody. A waitress from the South Side with nothing to offer a man who controlled half the city's underground. Why would he do this? But as she looked into those cold eyes, Helena realized something terrifying. It didn't matter why. Dante Moretti had made a decision, and in his world, his decisions were law. Father Sullivan stammered, his hands shaking as he clutched his prayer book. He tried to speak, to protest, to explain that this wasn't how things worked. But one of Dante's men took a single step forward, and the priest fell silent. Dante extended his hand toward Helena. It was not a gentle gesture, not a romantic one. It was a command. Helena's mind raced. Every instinct told her to run, to refuse, to demand answers. But another part of her, the part that had just been destroyed, humiliated, left broken on the floor, whispered something different. What did she have to lose? Marcus had taken everything already. Her dignity, her hope, her belief that she deserved to be loved. At least with Dante Moretti, she wouldn't be pitied. She wouldn't be the pathetic bride left at the altar. She would be something else entirely, something feared. Helena took his hand. His grip was firm, almost painful. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, steadying her when she swayed. He didn't smile, didn't offer comforting words. He simply turned to Father Sullivan and repeated, quieter but no less commanding, "Begin the ceremony." What just happened? How did a broken bride at her lowest moment catch the attention of the city's most dangerous man? The mystery deepens, and nothing will ever be the same. Don't miss Chapter 2, where Helena discovers the terrifying truth behind Dante's decision. Keep watching. Father Sullivan's hands trembled as he opened the prayer book. He'd performed hundreds of weddings in his 30 years as a priest, but never one like this. Never with armed men standing guard at every exit. Never with a groom whose reputation was written in blood and buried secrets. The guests remained frozen in their pews. No one dared leave. No one dared speak. They simply watched, witnesses to something that defied all logic and reason. Helena stood beside Dante Moretti at the altar, her mind spinning. She could smell his cologne, expensive, with notes of cedar and something darker she couldn't identify. He stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed, but his presence overwhelming. This was a man who never doubted himself, who never questioned his right to take what he wanted. But why did he want this? Why her? The ceremony proceeded in a surreal haze. Father Sullivan rushed through the traditional words, stumbling over phrases he'd recited thousands of times. The sacred vows felt strange in this context, transformed from promises of love into something more like a business contract or a transfer of property. When it came time for the rings, one of Dante's men stepped forward and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a wedding band that made Helena's breath catch, a platinum ring embedded with diamonds that caught the church's light and threw rainbow fractals across the altar. It must have cost a fortune, more money than she'd see in a lifetime of waiting tables. Dante took the ring without ceremony and slipped it onto Helena's finger. His touch was efficient, almost clinical. There was no tenderness, no romantic gesture, just the completion of a transaction. Father Sullivan turned to Helena, asking if she had a ring for her groom. She didn't. Her ring for Marcus was still in her clutch purse, forgotten in the preparation room. But before she could speak, another of Dante's men produced a second ring, a simple platinum band, elegant and understated. Someone had prepared for this. Someone had planned. Helena's hands shook as she took the ring. She looked up at Dante, searching his face for any clue, any explanation. But his expression remained impenetrable. She slid the ring onto his finger, feeling the absurdity of the moment. Hours ago, she'd been about to marry a man she thought she loved. Now she was binding herself to a complete stranger, a dangerous stranger. The final words came too quickly. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Father Sullivan didn't say the traditional, you may kiss the bride. Perhaps he knew better. Perhaps he sensed that this marriage was about power, not passion. Dante turned to Helena. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, but acknowledgement. He leaned down, his hand cupping her jaw with surprising gentleness, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss lasted only seconds, but Helena felt it through her entire body. His lips were firm, controlled, claiming her in front of everyone. When he pulled away, his thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a remaining tear. You're mine now, he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. No one will ever humiliate you again. Before Helena could respond, Dante straightened and addressed the church. His voice rang out with absolute authority. This marriage is legitimate and final. Anyone who questions it will answer to me personally. The threat was crystal clear. Several guests nodded frantically. Others stared at their laps, desperate to avoid eye contact. Dante took Helena's hand and led her down the aisle. His men fell into formation around them, creating a protective barrier. As they walked past the pews, Helena caught glimpses of the guests' faces. Shock, fear, confusion, and something else. Envy. Several women looked at her with expressions that weren't entirely sympathetic. They saw the ring on her finger, the powerful man at her side, and their pity transformed into something more complicated. Outside the church, the Chicago afternoon was warm and bright, completely at odds with the surreal darkness of what had just occurred. 3 black SUVs waited at the curb, their engines running. Dante guided Helena toward the center vehicle, his hand firm on the small of her back. Before she climbed inside, Helena turned back to look at the church. Claire stood in the doorway, her face pale with concern. Helena wanted to say something, to explain, but what explanation could possibly make sense? She raised her hand in a small wave, uncertain and afraid. Then Dante's men closed the vehicle doors, and the church disappeared from view. The interior of the SUV was luxurious. Leather seats, tinted windows, a privacy screen separating them from the driver. Dante sat beside her, his posture relaxed but his attention focused. One of his men sat in the front passenger seat, silent and watchful. For several minutes, no one spoke. The vehicle glided through Chicago traffic, heading north toward the wealthier neighborhoods along Lakeshore Drive. Helena watched the familiar streets pass by, each mile taking her further from her old life. Her small apartment above the bakery on the south side, her job at the diner, the simple existence she'd carved out for herself, all gone in less than an hour. Finally, Helena found her voice. It came out smaller than she'd intended. Why did you do this? Dante turned to look at her, those cold eyes assessing her once more. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his tone matter of fact. Marcus Holloway owes me $300,000. He borrowed money for a real estate investment that failed. He's been avoiding repayment for 6 months. Helena's blood turned to ice. What? He gambled with my money and lost. Then he tried to run. I don't allow people to run from their debts. The pieces started falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. Marcus's mysterious business deals, his increasing anxiety over the past few months, the phone calls he'd taken private, speaking in hushed, desperate tones, the way he'd sometimes look at her with guilt in his eyes. He knew he couldn't pay. Dante continued, his voice emotionless. So he made a deal. He offered you as collateral. The words hit Helena like a physical blow. Her stomach lurched. Her vision swam. What? 2 weeks ago, Marcus came to me with a proposal. He said if I forgave his debt, I could have you instead. His bride-to-be. He showed me your photograph, told me about your background. Orphan. No family. No connections. No one to ask questions if you disappeared. Helena couldn't breathe. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she'd ever experienced. Marcus hadn't abandoned her at the altar because of cold feet or second thoughts. He'd sold her, traded her like property to settle a debt. I declined his offer, Dante said, watching her reaction carefully. I don't deal in human trafficking, but I was curious. I wanted to see what kind of man would sell his own fiancée, what kind of woman he thought was worth $300,000. Tears burned Helena's eyes again, but these were different from before. These were tears of rage, of betrayal so profound it felt like poison in her veins. So I had him watched, Dante continued. This morning, I learned he'd fled the city, took what money he had left and ran. He never intended to show up to that church. He was going to leave you there, humiliated and abandoned, to face the consequences alone. The SUV turned onto Lakeshore Drive, the dark water of Lake Michigan stretching out to their right. Expensive high-rises lined the shore, their windows reflecting the afternoon sun. "I don't tolerate disrespect," Dante said quietly. "And what he did to you was the ultimate disrespect. So I made a different decision." Helena looked at him, trying to understand. "You married me to... what? Punish him? To send a message? Marcus Holloway thought you were worthless. Something to be used and discarded. I'm showing him, and everyone else in this city, that he was wrong. You're not his to throw away. You're mine to protect." The words should have been comforting, but they weren't. Helena was still property in this equation, just owned by a different man. A more powerful man, yes. A more dangerous man, but still not free. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's expression didn't change. "Now you learn what it means to be my wife. You'll live in my home. You'll have everything you need. In return, you'll play your role. You'll stand beside me when necessary. You'll represent my interests. And if I refuse..." For the first time, something almost like amusement flickered across Dante's face. "You won't refuse." It wasn't a threat. It was simple certainty. Dante Moretti didn't make decisions that people refused. The SUV pulled up to a massive high-rise overlooking the lake. The building was all glass and steel, modern and imposing. A doorman immediately appeared, opening the vehicle door with a respectful nod. Dante exited first, then extended his hand to help Helena out. Her wedding dress caught on the doorframe, and she stumbled slightly. Instantly, Dante's arm was around her waist, steadying her with the same effortless strength he'd shown in the church. They entered the building's lobby, all marble floors and contemporary art. The security guard behind the desk straightened immediately when he saw Dante, his hand moving to his forehead in a small salute. A private elevator took them to the top floor, the penthouse. When the doors opened, Helena stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the lake and the city skyline. The apartment was enormous, decorated with expensive furniture and original artwork. Everything was pristine, perfectly arranged, intimidating in its luxury. "Your things will be brought here tomorrow," Dante said, removing his suit jacket and draping it over a leather chair. "For tonight, everything you need is in the master bedroom." Helena turned to face him, this stranger who was now her husband. "I don't understand any of this. I don't understand you." Dante loosened his tie, his movements precise and controlled. "You don't need to understand, you just need to adapt. And if I can't?" He crossed the space between them in 3 strides. Standing close, he was even more imposing than before. But his voice, when he spoke, was softer than she'd heard. "You survived your entire life without family, without support, fighting for everything you had. You're stronger than you know, Helena. You'll adapt. And in time, you'll realize that what happened today wasn't a tragedy." "What was it then?" Dante's hand came up to her face again, his thumb tracing her jawline in a gesture that was almost tender. "A rescue. Helena's old life has been shattered, replaced by a world of danger and dark luxury. But what is Dante Moretti really after? And what happened to Marcus? The secrets run deeper than anyone imagined. Chapter 3 reveals the truth that changes everything. Stay with us." Helena didn't sleep that first night. The master bedroom was larger than her entire apartment had been. The bed was enormous, covered in silk sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But despite the luxury, despite the exhaustion weighing down her bones, sleep wouldn't come. Dante had shown her to the bedroom, informed her that his room was across the hall, and then disappeared into his study without another word. She heard him talking on the phone in Italian, his voice low and commanding, making plans, giving orders, running his empire. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the impossible turn her life had taken. This morning she'd been preparing to marry a man she thought she loved. Tonight she was legally bound to a mafia boss who'd claimed her like a chess piece in some game she didn't understand. Marcus had sold her. The knowledge burned in her chest like acid. Every sweet word he'd ever spoken was a lie. Every promise was worthless. He'd looked her in the eyes and told her she was his future, when really she was just a bargaining chip, a way to escape his mistakes. Part of her wanted to hate Dante for what he'd done, for walking into that church and changing her life without permission. But a darker part of her, A part she was afraid to examine too closely. Felt something else. Gratitude? No, that wasn't quite right. Relief? Closer. Because the alternative, being left alone in that church with everyone's pity, might have broken her permanently. At least now she had a different story. The woman who married a king instead of a coward. Morning came too quickly. Helena heard movement in the apartment. Footsteps, low voices, the sounds of people coming and going. She'd brought nothing with her. Had no clothes except her ruined wedding dress. But when she opened the massive closet, she found it filled with women's clothing. Designer labels, all in her size. Someone had prepared for this. Someone had measured her, studied her, planned every detail. The realization sent a chill down her spine. How long had Dante been watching her? How much did he already know? She selected the simplest outfit she could find, dark jeans and a cream sweater, and ventured out of the bedroom. The penthouse looked different in daylight, the lake sparkling beyond the windows, the city stretching out in all its complexity below. Dante sat at the dining table reading a newspaper and drinking espresso. He'd traded his wedding suit for dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked up when she entered, his gaze assessing but not unkind. "Coffee?" he asked. Helena nodded, unsure of what else to do. A woman appeared from the kitchen, middle-aged with kind eyes and efficient movements. She set a cup in front of Helena, along with a plate of fresh pastries. "This is Maria," Dante said. "She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her." Maria smiled warmly, but Helena could see the questions in her eyes. Everyone wanted to know why Dante Moretti had suddenly married a nobody. "Thank you," Helena managed. Dante returned to his newspaper, and for several minutes they sat in silence. The coffee was excellent, rich and strong. The pastries were probably from some expensive bakery, nothing like the day-old donuts she usually grabbed for breakfast between shifts at the diner. Her old life felt like it belonged to someone else. Finally, Dante folded the newspaper and looked at her directly. "You have questions. Ask them." Helena had 1,000 questions, but she started with the most pressing. "What happened to Marcus?" "He's being handled." "What does that mean?" Dante's expression didn't change. "It means he's facing the consequences of his choices. He stole from me. He tried to run. Those are unforgivable offenses in my world. Are you going to kill him?" The question hung in the air. Maria had quietly retreated to the kitchen, giving them privacy. "Does it matter to you?" Dante asked. Helena thought about it. She wanted to say yes, that despite everything she didn't want Marcus dead. But when she really examined her feelings, she found mostly numbness. Marcus had betrayed her so completely that the man she thought she loved had never really existed. "I don't know," she admitted. Dante stood, carrying his espresso cup to the window. He looked out at the city with an expression that might have been fondness or might have been ownership. With him, it was hard to tell. Marcus is alive. He's working off his debt through other means. He'll never return to Chicago, and he'll never contact you again. That's all you need to know. Helena joined him at the window, maintaining a careful distance. "Why did you really marry me?" "I don't believe it was just to send a message." Dante turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something more complex in his eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but interest. Calculation. "I've built an empire on fear and respect," he said quietly. "People obey me because they're afraid of what I'll do if they don't. But there are aspects of my world that require a different approach. Social functions, political connections, business dealings that happen in boardrooms instead of back alleys. For those situations, I need someone beside me, someone who can humanize me." "A prop," Helena said bitterly. "A partner. There's a difference." "Is there? You married me without asking. You're telling me what my role is without giving me a choice." Dante's jaw tightened. "You had a choice. You took my hand in that church. What choice did I really have? Refuse you in front of everyone? Go back to my life with everyone knowing I'd been abandoned?" "Yes," Dante said simply. "You could have refused. I wouldn't have forced you. I don't believe in slavery, Helena. You walked out of that church as my wife because some part of you wanted to." The words stung because they were true. She had wanted to. In that moment of complete devastation, Dante had offered her something: protection, revenge, a chance to transform her humiliation into power. She'd taken it. "So what happens now?" she asked. "I stand beside you at parties, smile for photographs, play the perfect mafia wife. If that's all you're capable of, then yes. but I suspect you're capable of more." Before Helena could respond, the sound of the elevator arriving drew their attention. One of Dante's men entered the penthouse, his expression urgent. "Boss, we have a situation. The Castellano family is requesting a meeting. They heard about the wedding." Dante's posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert. "When?" "Tonight. Neutral ground. They say it's about respect and protocol." Helena had heard of the Castellanos. They were another powerful family, rivals to Dante's organization. If they were requesting a meeting about the wedding, it couldn't be good. Dante was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded. "Accept the meeting, arrange security, and tell them my wife will be accompanying me." Helena's heart jumped. "What?" The man nodded and departed, leaving them alone again. Dante turned to Helena, his expression serious. "Welcome to your new life. Tonight you'll meet the other families. They'll want to see who you are. Assess if you're a weakness or a strength. How you handle yourself will determine how they treat me going forward. I don't know anything about your world. I'll mess this up." "Probably," Dante agreed. "But they don't know that yet. All they'll see is confidence. And you, Helena Moore, now Helena Moretti, are going to give them confidence to see." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the way it had been in the church. But this time Helena didn't back away. These people respect one thing above all else: strength. Not physical strength, but the strength to face fear without flinching. You showed that strength yesterday when you took my hand. Show it again tonight. And if I can't, then we'll both pay the price. But I don't think you'll fail. You've survived too much already. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Maria helped Helena dress for the evening. A black cocktail dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, paired with simple jewelry. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light, a constant reminder of the surreal position she now occupied. A stylist came to do her hair and makeup, transforming her from a tired waitress into someone who belonged in this world of power and danger. When Helena looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Dante appeared as the sun was setting, dressed in a dark suit that made him look even more imposing. He studied Helena for a long moment, then nodded his approval. "Perfect. You look like you belong." "I don't belong," Helena said quietly. "Not yet, but you will." The drive to the meeting was tense. They traveled in a convoy of 3 SUVs, all with tinted windows and armed guards. Dante explained what would happen. The Castellanos would try to test her, to find weaknesses in his armor. Her job was simply to be present, to show unity, to prove that Dante's impulsive marriage wasn't a sign of weakness. The meeting took place in a private dining room at one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. The kind of place that didn't advertise, where reservations were impossible without the right connections. When they arrived, Helena could feel eyes on them immediately. The Castellano family waited inside. Antonio Castellano, the patriarch, along with his 2 sons and their wives. They rose when Dante and Helena entered, their expressions carefully neutral. Antonio was in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He extended his hand to Dante first, a gesture of respect between equals. Then his gaze shifted to Helena. "So this is the bride we've heard so much about. Congratulations on your marriage, Mr. Moretti." There was something in his tone, not quite mockery, but skepticism. He thought she was a pretty distraction, a momentary whim that would fade. Dante's hand found the small of Helena's back, warm and steady. "This is my wife, Helena. She's now part of everything I am." The words were a declaration, a line drawn in sand. Antonio's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded with apparent respect. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Moretti." The dinner that followed was a careful dance of words and silences. The Castellanos asked polite questions, probing gently for information. Where was Helena from? How had she met Dante? What were her plans now that she was married? Helena answered carefully, following Dante's earlier advice. She spoke with confidence even when uncertain, never apologizing, never showing weakness. She felt Dante's presence beside her like an anchor, steady and strong. Halfway through the meal, Antonio's eldest son, Marco, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's unusual for someone like you to enter our world," he said to Helena. "Most women in your position would be overwhelmed. How are you handling the adjustment?" It was a trap. Any sign of weakness would be ammunition. Helena set down her wineglass and met his gaze directly. "Every adjustment is challenging, but I've learned that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing your fear and moving forward anyway. Silence fell over the table. Then Antonio laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension. Well said, Mrs. Moretti. Perhaps this marriage is more significant than we thought. The rest of the evening proceeded more smoothly. The Castellanos seemed satisfied that Helena wasn't simply a trophy wife, but someone with her own spine. When they finally departed, Antonio shook Dante's hand again, his expression thoughtful. You've surprised us, Dante. That doesn't happen often. In the SUV heading home, Helena felt the adrenaline draining from her system, leaving her exhausted and shaky. But she'd done it. She'd survived her first test. Dante reached over and took her hand, his grip firm and warm. You did well tonight. Better than well. They expected weakness and you gave them strength. I was terrified the whole time. I know, but you didn't show it. That's what matters. Back at the penthouse, Helena kicked off the uncomfortable heels and sank onto the couch. Her feet ached. Her face hurt from maintaining careful expressions all evening. But underneath the exhaustion, she felt something else. Pride? Accomplishment? A sense that maybe, just maybe, she could survive in this new world. Dante poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. He sat beside her, closer than he'd been before, his presence warm and solid. You asked me this morning why I really married you, he said quietly. The truth is more complicated than I let on. Helena turned to look at him, waiting. I've been alone in my position for a long time. People fear me, respect me, obey me, but no one truly stands beside me. Everyone wants something or they're too afraid to be honest. When I saw you in that church, broken and betrayed but still standing, I recognized something. Someone who understood what it meant to survive alone. His hand came up to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. I didn't marry you to send a message to Marcus. I married you because I saw strength in you that this world needs, that I need. Helena's breath caught. This was the most vulnerable she'd seen him, the most honest. I'm still learning the rules of your world, she said softly. I don't know if I'll ever truly belong. Belonging is earned, not given. You earned your place tonight, and you'll keep earning it day by day until one morning you wake up and realize this life is yours. He leaned closer, and Helena knew he was going to kiss her. This time it wouldn't be for show. This time it would mean something. She didn't pull away. Helena has passed her first test, but the real challenges are just beginning. Dante's world is more dangerous than she ever imagined, and someone from her past is about to return with devastating news. Chapter 4 brings shocking revelations and a choice that will change everything. Don't go anywhere. 3 weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Helena learned the routines of Dante's world. The morning meetings where quiet men discussed business in careful code. The phone calls at all hours that Dante took in private. The dinners with associates where every word carried weight. She attended events at his side, learning to read the room, to identify threats, to present the perfect image of strength and unity. Slowly, surprisingly, she began to feel like she belonged. Dante was not an affectionate husband in the traditional sense. He didn't bring her flowers or whisper sweet nothings, but he was present in ways that mattered more. When she struggled with the social expectations of his world, he guided her patiently. When she had nightmares about Marcus's betrayal, he was there, solid and real, a reminder that she wasn't alone. And there were moments, quiet conversations late at night, his hand finding hers under the table at dinners, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, when she glimpsed something deeper beneath his controlled exterior. She was falling for him. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. But on the 22nd day of her new life, everything changed. Helena was having coffee with Maria in the kitchen when Dante emerged from his study, his expression darker than she'd ever seen. One of his men stood beside him, tension radiating from both of them. Helena, we need to talk, privately. Maria immediately excused herself. Helena followed Dante into the living room, her heart racing. She'd learned to read his moods, and this one was dangerous. What's wrong? Dante handed her a folder. Open it. Inside were photographs and documents. It took Helena a moment to understand what she was seeing, and when she did, the room tilted. The photos showed Marcus, but not Marcus fleeing the city or working off his debt. Marcus in a luxury hotel in Miami. Marcus wearing expensive clothes, laughing with people Helena didn't recognize. Marcus very much not facing consequences. I don't understand, she whispered. Dante's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath. 2 days ago I received information that Marcus resurfaced in Miami. He's not working off his debt. He's living comfortably under the protection of the Romano family. Helena looked up sharply. The Romanos? But they're my rivals. Yes. The pieces started falling into a picture Helena didn't want to see. You said Marcus was being handled. You said he'd never contact me again. That was the plan. But it appears Marcus made a deal with someone else. Someone who wanted to embarrass me. Helena's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. Bank statements showing large deposits into Marcus's accounts. Flight records. Hotel registrations. He'd escaped. He'd betrayed Dante just as completely as he'd betrayed her. There's more, Dante said quietly. He pulled out another photo and handed it to her. This one showed Marcus standing with an older man Helena didn't recognize. They were shaking hands, both smiling. That's Vincent Romano, Dante explained. Head of the Romano family. They've been trying to undermine my position for years. This marriage, our marriage, strengthened my standing significantly. The other families saw it as a power move. But if it became known that the man who humiliated you was walking free, protected by my enemies, it would make you look weak, Helena finished. Like you can't protect what's yours. Exactly. The Romanos have been spreading rumors. They're saying I married you out of pity, not strategy. That Marcus played me. That I'm losing my edge. Helena set the photos down, her mind racing. So what happens now? Dante was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. The traditional response would be to eliminate Marcus, to send a message that no one betrays me and lives. But, he turned to look at her and the conflict in his eyes was startling. This man who always knew exactly what to do, who never hesitated, was struggling. But you're my wife now, and despite everything he did to you, killing him would mean something different than it would have before. I need to know how you feel about this. Helena was stunned. Dante Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago, was asking her opinion, giving her a choice in something this significant. She thought about Marcus, about the man who'd held her and promised her forever, about the coward who'd sold her to save himself, about the ghost who still haunted her nightmares, his betrayal a wound that hadn't fully healed. I don't love him anymore, she said slowly. I'm not even sure I ever really loved him. I loved who I thought he was, but that person never existed. That's not what I asked. Helena met Dante's gaze. I know what you're really asking. You want to know if I'll blame you. If killing Marcus will destroy whatever we're building here. Yes. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lake. In 3 weeks, this view had become familiar. This penthouse had become home. And the man behind her had become, what? Her husband, yes. Her protector. But also, increasingly, someone she cared about. Someone who'd shown her that strength could coexist with respect. That power didn't have to mean cruelty. When you walked into that church, Helena said quietly, you saved me from the worst moment of my life. You gave me dignity when I had nothing left. You've treated me with more respect than Marcus ever did. Even though our marriage started as a business arrangement, she turned to face him. So no, I won't blame you for doing what you need to do. Marcus made his choices. He has to face the consequences. And honestly, her voice grew harder. I think he deserves whatever happens to him. Dante crossed the room to her, his movements deliberate. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones in that gesture she'd come to know. You're stronger than I even imagined, he said softly. I learned from the best. This time, when he kissed her, it was different from before. There was heat there, passion that had been carefully controlled for weeks. Helena responded, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. All the tension, all the complicated emotions of the past 3 weeks poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. I need to handle this situation with the Romanos. It won't be quick and it won't be clean. Are you prepared for what that means? Will it be dangerous? Everything in my world is dangerous. But yes, this will be particularly complicated. The Romanos won't give up Marcus without a fight. There will be consequences, possibly violence. Helena took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then we face it together. Isn't that what marriage means? Facing the hard things together? Dante pulled back slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart race. When I walked into that church, I thought I was making a strategic decision, a calculated move to solve a problem and send a message, but I was wrong. About what? about what I was really doing. I wasn't saving you, Helena. You were saving me. I just didn't know it yet. Before Helena could respond, Dante's phone rang. He answered it, his expression hardening as he listened. When he hung up, he turned to her with grim determination. The Romanos have made their move. They're holding a press conference in an hour announcing that they're protecting Marcus as a humanitarian gesture. They're going to paint me as a vindictive criminal who targeted an innocent man. Can they do that? They just did. Now I have to respond, and that response needs to be overwhelming and final. Dante made several calls, his voice clipped and commanding. Helena watched him work, saw the machinery of his empire coming to life. Within minutes, plans were in motion. People were being mobilized. Resources were being allocated. When he finished, Dante turned to her. I need you to do something for me. Something difficult. Anything. The Romanos are trying to make this personal. They want to divide us. To use your connection to Marcus against me. So I need you to stand with me publicly. To make a statement that shows everyone where your loyalty lies. Helena's stomach clenched. What kind of statement? We're holding our own press conference in 2 hours. You're going to tell your story. How Marcus betrayed you. How he tried to use you as a bargaining chip. And how, despite everything, you found strength and purpose in our marriage. Dante, I can't. I'm not good at public speaking. I'll mess it up. He came to her, his hands on her shoulders, steady and strong. You faced down Antonio Castellano and his entire family without flinching. You've navigated my world for 3 weeks with grace and intelligence. You can do this. What if I say the wrong thing? Then we deal with it together. But Helena, I don't think you will. I think you're going to show everyone exactly who Helena Moretti is, and they're going to remember it. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Maria helped her dress in a sophisticated navy suit that projected both professionalism and strength. A media consultant briefed her on likely questions, gave her talking points, taught her how to control her breathing and maintain eye contact. But in the end, Helena knew the truth. No amount of preparation could really ready her for this. She'd be standing in front of cameras, exposing her most painful moments to the entire city. It went against every instinct she had, yet she would do it. For Dante, for herself, for the new life she was building from the ashes of her old one. The press conference was held in a hotel conference room packed with reporters and cameras. Dante stood at the podium first, his presence commanding immediate silence. He spoke briefly, his tone measured but firm, addressing the Romanos' accusations with cold logic and carefully worded threats disguised as statements of fact. Then he stepped aside and gestured to Helena. I'd like to introduce my wife, Helena Moretti. She has something to say. Helena approached the podium on shaking legs. The lights were blinding. The cameras felt like weapons pointed at her. But then she found Dante's eyes in the crowd, steady and sure, and she remembered what he'd told her. Strength isn't never being afraid. It's facing your fear and moving forward anyway. She began to speak. She told them about meeting Marcus, about believing in his promises, about the life they'd planned together. She described the wedding day, the hours of waiting, the humiliation of being abandoned. And then she told them the truth that only she and Dante knew, that Marcus had tried to trade her like property, that he'd valued her at $300,000, that he'd disappeared rather than face the consequences of his actions. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the words flowing more easily. She explained how Dante's unexpected appearance had given her a choice, to remain a victim of Marcus's betrayal, or to reclaim her dignity and her future. She talked about the past 3 weeks, about learning what real respect looked like, about discovering her own strength. The Romanos want you to believe I'm a pawn, she said, looking directly into the cameras, that my marriage is a punishment or a business transaction, but they're wrong. I chose this life. I chose Dante Moretti, and I would make that choice again every single day. She finished speaking and stepped back from the podium. The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted with questions. But Dante was already there, his hand finding hers, leading her away from the chaos. In the SUV afterward, Helena collapsed against the seat, adrenaline draining from her system. She'd done it. She'd told her story, owned her truth, and transformed her pain into power. Dante pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. You were perfect. Better than perfect. You didn't just defend me. You defined yourself. Will it be enough? Will the Romanos back down? They'll try to spin it, but the damage is done. You've turned their weapon into our shield. Marcus can't hurt us now. His betrayal only makes our story more compelling. Helena leaned into Dante's warmth, feeling safer than she had in weeks. What happens to him now? That's no longer about revenge. It's about justice. Marcus stole from me, betrayed you, and aligned with my enemies. The consequences for those actions are clear, but they'll be handled quietly, professionally. You won't have to think about him again. They rode in silence for a while, the city passing by outside. Helena's old life felt like it had belonged to someone else entirely. The scared waitress who'd dreamed of a simple wedding and a simple future was gone. In her place was someone stronger, sharper, more resilient. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best thing. When they returned to the penthouse, Dante poured them both wine and led Helena to the couch. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I need to tell you something," Dante said quietly. "Something I've been avoiding." Helena's heart skipped. "What?" "When I walked into that church, I told myself it was strategy. But the truth is more complicated. I saw your photograph 2 weeks before the wedding. Marcus showed it to me when he made his pathetic offer. And something about you stayed with me. I found myself thinking about you, wondering what kind of person you were. When I learned he'd abandoned you, I was furious. Not at the business implications, but at the cruelty of it." He turned to look at her, vulnerability in his eyes that she'd never seen before. "I married you because I wanted to. Not for strategy, not for revenge, but because in that moment, I knew you were someone I wanted in my life. I just couldn't admit it, even to myself." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears she'd shed in the church. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of hope. "I think I've been falling in love with you," she admitted. "I didn't want to. I told myself it was just gratitude or survival instinct. But it's more than that. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued. And I don't want to lose that." Dante set down his wine glass and pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her completely. "You won't lose it. You're mine, Helena. Not as property, but as a partner. As my wife in every sense of the word. And I protect what's mine." She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude, desire, fear, hope, love. He responded with equal intensity, his hands in her hair, his body warm and solid against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dante rested his forehead against hers. The past 3 weeks were a test, for both of us, to see if this could work, if we could build something real from such complicated beginnings. "And?" Helena asked softly. "And I think we've proven that we can. That we are. That what we have is stronger than the circumstances that brought us together." Over the following days, the fallout from the press conference continued. The Romanos tried to counter Helena's narrative, but her raw honesty had resonated with people. Social media exploded with support for her story. Suddenly, she wasn't the poor abandoned bride. She was the woman who'd turned her worst moment into a new beginning. The other crime families took notice. The respect Dante commanded grew stronger, bolstered by the compelling story of his marriage. People saw Helena at his side and understood that this was a partnership built on mutual strength, not fear or coercion. Marcus disappeared from Miami 3 days after the press conference. The official story was that he'd fled the country, but Helena knew better. She didn't ask for details, didn't want to know. That chapter of her life was closed. A month after the wedding that changed everything, Helena stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the pregnancy test in her shaking hands. Positive. She'd suspected for a week but had been too afraid to confirm it. Now, looking at those 2 clear lines, she felt a wave of emotions so complex she couldn't name them all. Fear, certainly, but also joy, hope, the sense that this unexpected child was the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was building. Dante found her there, still staring at the test. He took one look at her face, at the plastic stick in her hand, and went completely still. "Helena?" She turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and held up the test. For a long moment, Dante didn't move. Then a smile broke across his face, genuine, unguarded, transforming his usually stern features into something approaching joy. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Helena asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. You've given me everything I didn't know I needed. A partner, a home, and now a family. Helena laughed through her tears. This wasn't how I planned any of this. Plans are overrated. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never see coming. They stood there in the bathroom, holding each other, contemplating the future they were building together. A future that had started with betrayal and pain, but had transformed into something neither of them expected. Love. Real, complicated, hard-won love. 6 months later, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Sophia, and when Dante held his child for the first time, tears in his eyes, Helena knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice that day in the church. Not every fairy tale begins with love at first sight. Some begin with pain, with broken promises, with the courage to take a stranger's hand when everything else has fallen apart. And those stories, the difficult ones, the complicated ones, the ones that force you to fight for your happiness, those are often the most beautiful stories of all. Helena had entered that church as a nobody, a poor waitress with simple dreams. She'd left it as Helena Moretti, wife to the most powerful man in Chicago. But more importantly, she'd discovered who she really was. A woman strong enough to survive betrayal, brave enough to embrace the unknown, and resilient enough to build a life worth living from the ashes of her worst nightmare. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together. From abandonment and betrayal to power and unexpected love, Helena's transformation shows us that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. Sometimes the person who saves us is the last person we'd ever expect, and sometimes the scariest path leads to the most beautiful destination. If you enjoyed this powerful story of resilience, transformation, and finding love in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel for more emotionally gripping tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it and let us know in the comments. Would you have taken Dante's hand? What would you have done in Helena's situation? Don't miss our next story. Another incredible journey of courage, mystery, and the unexpected paths that change our lives forever. Until then, remember, your story isn't over. Sometimes it's just beginning in ways you never imagined. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Tentar novamente o Claude pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas. Sonnet 4.5